poverty reduction. Clearly, we will consult with civil society and NGOs, and Lord Ahmed has recently done that, and we will all continue to do that. In addition, in relation to the COVID issues she raises, 1.3 billion has been focused specifically on COVID, and over 300 programmes have been repurposed to deal with COVID issues.
We now go to Scotland to SNP spokesperson Chris Law. Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Global poverty has risen for the first time in over 20 years, and by the end of this year, it's estimated there'll be more than 150 million people in extreme poverty. Yet, against this backdrop, the UK government recklessly abolished the Department for International Development. It's reneging on its commitment of 0.7% of GNI and doesn't even mention eradicating poverty in the 7 global challenges that UK aid is to be focused on. So can the Minister explicitly commit to eradicating poverty within a new official development assistance framework, rather than pursuing inhumane and devastating cuts of the Prime Minister's Little Britain vanity project?
The honourable gentleman knows we share a passion for international development, and these specific targets do aim to alleviate poverty, to eradicate poverty. But the causes of poverty and the solutions of poverty are complex, which is why the merger of the department works, dealing with development and diplomacy alongside one another to overcome the scourge of poverty, which sadly has increased, not decreased, as a result of COVID. And the joined-up department will help in the objectives that he and I care so passionately about.
Substantive question to Minister Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're disappointed at Sri Lanka's withdrawal of support for Resolution 31. We made this clear in statements at the UNHRC in February, June and September 2020. We're working with international partners and have had discussions with Sri Lankan government on how to take this forward at the UNHRC in March. We're committed to the principles of the resolution, and our approach to Sri Lanka will be a priority for the UK at the HRC over the next few months.
Let's head over to Wilford with West Streeting. West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK's leadership on the issue of human rights in Sri Lanka, both historic and ongoing human rights abuses, has been critical. And we saw, whether through David Miliband as Foreign Secretary or David Cameron as Prime Minister, the importance of leadership at the very highest level. So what specifically will the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister be doing as leaders of the core group ahead of that crucial UN Human Rights Council in Geneva in March to make sure that the perpetrators of human rights abuses in Sri Lanka do not go unpunished, and we can look forward to a future based on truth, justice and reconciliation for all the peoples of Sri Lanka?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. As I pointed out in my response, we are absolutely committed to the principles of the resolution. My colleague, ministerial colleague Lord Ahmed, has discussed human rights and accountability with the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister and the High Commissioner in November and December respectively. We have spoken with Sri Lankan officials and with Geneva over the last week on these very issues.
We have Shadow Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on these benches believe that the government's foreign policy should be rooted in our country's commitment to human rights and the rule of law. Therefore, we deeply regret that in February 2020, the Sri Lankan government withdrew from its Human Rights Council obligations to promote reconciliation and accountability following the country's devastating civil war. More recently, the Sri Lankan government has introduced forced cremation for COVID-19 victims, a policy that has absolutely no basis in science and which rides roughshod over the traditional practices of Sri Lankan religious minorities, and which has rightly caused hurt and outrage amongst Muslim and Christian communities across the UK. So I ask the Minister, what steps has he taken to persuade the Sri Lankan government to end forced cremations? What work is he doing with international partners ahead of the next Human Rights Council session in March to ensure that the Sri Lankan government re-engages with the peace, reconciliation and accountability process? And what discussions has he had about human rights in the context of UK-Sri Lankan trade deal negotiations?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and he's right to raise it. We have shared guidance and scientific background with the government of Sri Lanka on how the UK has ensured that burials can continue to operate in a safe format within the WHO guidelines. We've also discussed via my colleague Lord Ahmed the importance of minority rights with the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister in November. Our High Commissioner to Sri Lanka has raised forced cremation several times with the Sri Lankans, most recently just over a week ago. We continue to speak with Sri Lanka and have done so within the last week, and with Geneva regarding their commitment to upholding this resolution. We're certainly committed to it. We will continue that dialogue.
We have a substantive question to the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I will answer questions 5 and 6 together. The resumption of Congress and the certification of Joe Biden's victory on the 7th of January sent an essential message that the democratic will of the US people cannot be challenged by a violent minority.
We now go over to David Linden in Scotland. David Linden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the wake of what happened on Capitol Hill, politicians around the world looked on in condemnation at the incendiary language of Mr. Trump, without regretting how close a relationship they'd formed with the president. Sadly, though, the same cannot be said for political figures in this government. And so I must ask the Foreign Secretary whether he and his party regret cozying up to Trump, kowtowing to him and legitimising him and his racist, climate change denying rhetoric, or will they remain eclipsed by any populist leader who comes along?
I'm afraid that the honourable gentleman's assertion and caricature is very far from the truth. We made clear that the scenes by a small but ugly minority in Washington were disgraceful. We also made clear we had the full confidence in the system of checks and balances in the US to provide a definitive result and a smooth transition, and we look forward to working with the new administration.
Let's head to Folkestone with Damien Collins. Damien Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There were 342 assaults on journalists in America last year, and there have been 13 further this year. Will my right honourable friend work with the new administration in America to protect the rights of journalists around the world, and also call on social media companies to do more, not just to tackle harmful disinformation, but also to make sure that social media platforms are not used to incite attacks against journalists?
Thank my honourable friend. I don't know where that bell came from, his end or our end, but in any event, it certainly added a bit of flourish to his question. It's Amazon, is it? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, as ever. Can I just say to my honourable friend, look, he's absolutely right. The press must be allowed to cover events without fear or denial of access. We've discussed our concerns about the violent events that we saw at official level, but also at ministerial level. I've done that myself. I can assure him no British journalists were detained. And of course, working with Canada and others, we have a media freedom coalition, and we certainly look forward to cooperating with the US and many others to be pioneering that work through our global leadership year in 2021.
Minister Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we're all utterly condemned the lawless and violent storming of the US Capitol on the 6th of January, with the FBI identifying the involvement of far-right activists and domestic terrorists. And it's clear that week after week of President Trump's behaviour, undermining the electoral victory of President-elect Biden, played a key role in inciting the mob. Does the Secretary of State, does the Foreign Secretary believe that this violent episode has damaged democracy? And what urgent steps can be taken to mend that sense that our government was lukewarm around the election time and failed to uphold that sense of democracy which we all deeply care about?
Well, I have to say to the Honourable Lady that the UK was not lukewarm, and she must have missed the Prime Minister's statement where it was very clear that what President Trump should have done, well, we don't conduct diplomacy by Twitter, unlike the Honourable Lady, and we were absolutely clear about it. We are also at the same time confident in the US system of checks and balances, and very much looking forward to working with the new administration.
A substantive question to the Foreign Secretary. Question 8.
Mr. Speaker, we are very concerned about Iran's continued systemic non-compliance with its nuclear commitments. We've made that clear with our E3 partners, including recently at the ministerial meeting of JCPOA.
We now head to Eastleigh with Paul Holmes. Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recent confirmation from the IAEA that Iran has resumed enriching uranium to 20% purity at its Fordow facility is enormously concerning and is arguably the most significant breach of the JCPOA. Will the Foreign Secretary confirm that his department will press the new administration under President-elect Biden to rejoin the deal and put much-needed pressure on Iran to return to compliance?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman and say, first of all, he's absolutely right about the risk from the systemic now serial non-compliance from Iran. We held on the 21st of December a ministerial meeting of the JCPOA Ministerial Commission, and that was an opportunity to set out not just the UK but with our French and German partners very clearly our position. It is welcome that President-elect Biden and the new administration has talked about coming back into the JCPOA, enhancing and strengthening it. It'll be one of the early topics of conversation that we have with the new administration.
Let's head to Tonbridge with the chair of the Select Committee, Tom Tugendar. Tom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hope the whole House will join me in welcoming the newest member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and congratulate the honourable member for Rutland on the birth of her second child, which I've just heard about just now. And before the Secretary of State, my right honourable friend, joins me in offering such congratulations, would he also please give some thought to the approach to the new Biden administration on the Iran deal? He will have read in the Foreign Affairs Committee's report, so expertly helped by the honourable member for Rutland, the various thoughts that we put down, including looking at how we can work with regional partners and allies who are deeply concerned by this change of administration and perhaps a change of tone in the White House. What is he going to do to make sure that the Biden administration, the UK administration, and indeed our friends and partners in the region all work together to make sure we stop this malevolent dictatorship expanding its evil reach any further?
Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend, the member of the chair of the Select Committee? Can I also pay tribute to the honourable member for Rutland and congratulate on both parents on their new child? A very happy moment. On Iran, he's absolutely right. We're obviously putting a lot of thought into how we engage with the new administration, including specifically on Iran. I would just say that, first of all, the E3 unity that we have shown throughout, I think, is a value, a strength, a lever for the United States and the new administration, but also that there is a window of opportunity that he'll be aware of between now and the Iranian presidential elections in early June to try and make some progress, some definitive progress. And I think against that time frame, we ought to be able to focus minds.
Tamanjeet Singh Desi.
Number 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I will answer questions 11 to 15 together. The UK is committed to rapid, equitable access to safe and effective vaccines through multilateral collaboration. We're combining our diplomatic influencing, our development expertise and money to tackle COVID-19 and secure vaccines. And the UK is a founding member and one of the largest donors to the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, the AMC, and we've committed £548 million to this international initiative for global equitable access, which through match funding, Mr. Speaker, has encouraged other donors to commit an additional $1 million.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Speaker. The world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure, according to the head of the World Health Organization. And unless there is a collaborative global approach, it will merely prolong the pandemic and the ensuing human and economic suffering. So does the Minister agree that any hoarding of vaccines by richer nations is unforgivable and unconscionable, and that we must all work collectively for the betterment of all humanity and by simultaneously helping people within our nation as well as helping to provide for those that are less affluent than us?
Thank you. The honourable gentleman makes a really important point, and I'm sure that's why he will agree with me that the COVAX AMC is such an important tool for us and facility to help developing countries. This particular facility will support access to COVID-19 vaccinations for up to 92 developing countries, and this will contribute to the supply of 1 billion doses in 2021 and the vaccination of 500 million people. And let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, the UK is at the forefront of multilateral efforts to ensure equitable access, or global access, sorry, through this COVAX facility.
With Bel Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the director of the World Health Organization stated that 39 million vaccine doses had been administered in 49 higher income countries, whereas just 25 doses had been given in one poor country. Not 25 million, not 25,000, just 25. So does the Minister agree that global equality on the vaccine rollout should not just be a moral imperative, but a strategic one to stop the spread of the virus? And if she does agree, why does her government not support calls for pharmaceutical companies to waive intellectual property rights and openly share technology through the World Health Organization COVID Technology Access Pool?
Mr. Speaker. Well, when it comes to vaccines, we've been very, very clear that we support equitable access. This is a global pandemic. This is a virus that respects no boundaries, it respects no barriers. And so that is why we are working and we are leading the way at the forefront of multilateral efforts to ensure we get equitable access through this really important COVAX facility.
Let's head up to York with Rachel Maskell. Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to press the Minister further because none of us are safe until all of us are safe. And clearly with the threat of spread of the virus, but also mutation of the virus, we all are at risk until the world is vaccinated. So will the Minister say specifically what work her government has done to overcome the intellectual property rights in order to ensure that we can see manufacturing of the vaccine in the global south and ensure those countries which currently can't get access to the vaccine can distribute it locally?
Thank you. The UK believes that a robust and a fair intellectual property system is a key part of the innovation framework that allows economies to grow and to become innovators while enabling society to benefit from knowledge and ideas. And we believe that non-exclusive voluntary licensing has advantages over compulsory licensing because it creates a sound basis for long-lasting beneficial relationships and incentives to create and commercialise new inventions such as those life-changing vaccines.
Let's head to Bridgend with Dr. Jamie Wallace. Dr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for her answer, but what steps is her department taking to ensure that the most poorest and the most disadvantaged countries have access to vaccines?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think this goes to the heart of this particular question today, Mr. Speaker. And our commitment will support access to COVID-19 vaccines for up to 92 developing countries by contributing to the supply of 1 billion doses in 2021. And this is only possible through the COVAX AMC facility, which we have been leading from the front on, and with our big commitment of £548 million to this facility and the encouragement of others to step up to the mark and reach the $1 billion target too.
Let's head up to rugby with Mark Pawsey. Mark Pawsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has set out how important it is for people around the world to be vaccinated against COVID-19 and reminded us about the UK's strong record of supporting vaccination in the developing world. Is she confident that we'll be able to continue to meet our international commitments on vaccination if we reduce our levels of aid from 0.7% of GDP?
Thank you. And I know my honourable friend takes a really keen interest in international development, Mr. Speaker. But what I would say is that the seismic impact of the pandemic on the UK economy has forced us to take tough but necessary decisions, including our temporary reduction of ODA from 0.7% to 0.5% of GNI. We will return to this level as soon as the fiscal situation allows, but let me reassure him that we will remain a world-leading aid donor, spending that 0.5% of GNI. And when it comes to our commitment, particularly on vaccines and vaccinations, Mr. Speaker, I would perhaps just point to the Gavi vaccine summit that the Prime Minister hosted in the early part of last year, where the UK government committed to 1.65 billion over the next 5 years to support the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, and that will immunise 300 million children and save up to 8 million lives.
Let's head up to Stirling with Alan Smith, the SNP spokesperson. Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd echo the concerns of colleagues across the House that vaccine nationalism is dangerous and self-defeating. This isn't an Olympics. This is a global problem that we must deal with on a multilateral basis. And I pay tribute to what the UK has done in donating to the COVAX system. What plans does the Minister have? Because there is still a $4.3 billion shortfall to this. And as we've heard, nobody's safe until everybody is safe on a global scale. What plans are there to convene a Gavi 2 summit to bring international donors together to work with colleagues across the world to make sure that nobody is left behind in this? And would she condemn colleagues in her own government who are indulging in vaccine nationalism and pretending that one country is doing better than another when we really are facing a common challenge?
This is a global pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and I commend the work of the government in the vaccination programme that we have. And I look to my own constituency and the tremendous work that Walsall Manor Hospital and the Oak Park Centre are doing. But alongside that, let me reassure the honourable gentleman that we are absolutely committed to equitable access. And the Global Gavi Summit that we held earlier last year was an absolute example of, just one example actually, of the leading part that the UK government is taking when it comes to the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic.
Let's head up to Birmingham with Shadow Minister Preet Kaur.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the longer the pandemic rages, the more damage will be done to ordinary families around the world who are suffering from a crisis they did not create. We have an opportunity to save countless lives and livelihoods here in the UK and abroad by playing our part in cooperating with other countries and using our influence to bring them together. As we've seen during this pandemic, this government has consistently struggled with transparency and accountability. So will the United Kingdom fulfil the ask made yesterday by the Director General of the World Health Organization and make public all bilateral contracts it has signed for COVID-19 vaccines, including on volumes, pricing and delivery dates, so we can deal with production bottlenecks and ensure equitable access to the vaccine, giving us all the best chance of beating this deadly virus? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I do not accept the honourable lady's assertions when it comes to transparency. And we, the UK, are absolutely at the front line and the forefront of multilateral efforts in ensuring equitable global access. If you look at what the UK government has done, Mr. Speaker, we contributed to CEPI in the early part of this pandemic to FIND, which is the Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics. We have contributed to Gavi, to the COVAX AMC. This is all about helping the world's poorest. We have also flexed a lot of our normal aid work to help countries who are suffering from this pandemic, because we know that as well as the primary impact of COVID-19, there are many secondary impacts also.
To the Chair of the Select Committee in Rotherham, Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is right, vaccines alone are not enough, and she's also aware that the International Development Committee has just done an inquiry onto the secondary impacts, which show that developing countries are suffering economically through their healthcare and through gender inequality. What efforts and preparations are being made by FCDO to prevent there being a development mountain to climb after the pandemic subsides?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognise the work of the IGC, and let me say I'm very pleased that its work is continuing. That would be the first point that I wanted to make. But let me just reiterate that when it comes to COVID-19, the UK and the FCDO really remains at the forefront. With the funds that we have, we continue to support the world's poorest, and we will be continuing to focus on the bottom billion. It is about working, yes, with the development world, but it's also where we can, working with the public sector and the private sector. And I look to the example Oxford AstraZeneca, Mr. Speaker, where the UK government has worked very, very hard in investing. We invested 84 million in the helping to develop that vaccine. We're now rolling out that vaccine. We've committed to the AMC, and we are absolutely committed to helping the world's poorest.
Substantive question to Minister Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scientific advances funded by the UK have helped drive reductions in extreme poverty, declines in childhood mortality and increases in life expectancy across the developing world. Our investments, including affordable rapid diagnostic tests for COVID-19 and the world's first child-friendly anti-malarial drug, are delivering benefit to hundreds of millions. We will continue to leverage UK and global scientific excellence and invest in cutting-edge technology and research to provide solutions to critical development challenges.
To Wiltshire with Dr. Andrew Morrison. Dr. Morrison.
The government is doing extremely well in rolling out the vaccine in the UK, and the AstraZeneca vaccine in particular is deployable potentially in developing countries. Can the Minister say at what point we will be passing vaccine that we have ordered, which greatly surpasses the need for our population to COVAX? And does he agree with me that it is vital that in advance of that, we do everything in our power to develop healthcare infrastructure in developing countries, without which a credible vaccine rollout is just not possible?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. I agree with him. We should be incredibly proud of the work that we have done with regards to the vaccine. I myself have had meetings with my Philippine counterparts on vaccines alongside AstraZeneca. We are supporting equitable access through our funding for the COVAX facility. We're one of the largest donors to the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment to support access for 92 developing countries, and we've committed £548 million. COVAX's partners, which include Gavi, World Health Organization and UNICEF, they have huge experience in supporting developing country immunisation systems and the programming of immunisation. We expect the initial rollout to COVAX AMC countries to start in the first quarter of this year.
We now have a substantive question to Minister Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is a global leader in promoting action on antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, and it's an international priority. We helped achieve the 2016 UN Political Declaration on AMR, and UK aid contributes significantly to AMR efforts around the world. This includes our flagship Fleming Fund, which builds capacity on AMR in lower and middle income countries, focusing on things such as investments in water, sanitation and hygiene, healthcare facilities and broader health systems strengthening.
I sent to Yorkshire with Kevin Holding-Ray. Kevin Holding-Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A leading Oxford-based professor of microbiology today described COVID as the short, sharp earthquake and antimicrobial resistance as the massive tsunami in the background. On the basis that AMR in pigs and chickens has trebled in developing nations since the year 2000, would my honourable friend press for more actions to limit the unnecessary use of antibiotics in humans, pigs and chickens?
This is a really important point, and I know this is a topic that my honourable friend has taken a keen interest in for some time in this place. And we absolutely recognise the risks to human health of the inappropriate use of antimicrobials in agriculture and food production, and that's we see that through our national action plan. The vast majority of global antimicrobial use, as he will probably be very aware, is in agriculture, and we are a major funder of the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, which is an international agricultural research organisation which supports low and middle income countries in controlling agriculture associated AMR risks, which is working to understand how antimicrobials are used, by whom, and how these contribute, Mr. Speaker, to the misuse of antimicrobials.
Scott Menton.
Question 20, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 20, 21 and 22 together. The UK remains deeply concerned by the ongoing conflict and the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. We welcome the positive steps forward in the implementation of the Riyadh Agreement, including the formation of a new inclusive Yemeni cabinet. We condemn in the strongest terms the Houthi attack on Aden Airport, which killed over 25 civilians, and we call on Houthis to cease such attacks and demonstrate renewed commitment to the political process. As my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, warned in September, Yemen has never looked more likely to slide into famine. We are using our £214 million in aid funding to help around 500,000 vulnerable people each month and enrol 25,000 children into malnutrition prevention programmes. Whilst we share the US concerns about the Houthis' continual attacks on civilians in Yemen and cross-border attacks into Saudi Arabia, we do not intend to prescribe the Houthis at this time, but we will keep this under regular review.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The crisis in Yemen is of great concern to all of us, but it is perfectly clear that Iran is exploiting the conflict for its own ends. Reports of Iran sending advanced UAVs to the Houthis will no doubt only inflame tensions further. Does the Minister agree with me that until Iranian aspirations for regional dominance are curtailed, this conflict, and indeed many others, will continue, and sadly more lives will be lost?
Thank you. We must see an end to Iran's destabilizing interference in Yemen, which has stoked further conflict, and we have raised this issue directly with the Iranian government. Iran's provision of weapons to Houthis is in contravention of the UN Security Resolution 2216 and the UN Security Council embargo on the export of weapons by Iran. We remain deeply concerned at Iran's political, financial and military support to a number of militant and proscribed groups in the region, and we will continue working with international partners to dissuade Iran from proliferation and wider destabilising actions.
Let's head up to Scotland with Alison Thewlis. Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mark Lowcock, the UN Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief, has clearly stated that the US's designation of the Houthis as a terrorist group will push Yemen into a famine on a scale not seen for 40 years, and that only a reversal of the US decision will fix this. So could I ask the Minister, what is the UK government doing to avert this catastrophe and get the US administration to change their mind?
Following President Trump's administration's decision to designate the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organisation, we have requested the US put in place comprehensive exemptions to limit humanitarian impact, commercial imports and the UN peace effort. And our priority is to support the UN's peace effort. My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, will continue to engage with the will engage with the incoming US administration on this and a number of other important bilateral issues.
Let's head up to Salford with Rebecca Long-Bailey. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Salford is home to one of the UK's oldest Yemeni communities, as well as charities providing humanitarian relief to the region, and they fear that the US designation would have a devastating impact, as humanitarian access and the ability for food supplies and other goods to reach Yemeni civilians would be severely obstructed. I welcome the comments that the Minister has just made, but will he go one step further? And will he contact President-elect Biden and ask him to revoke the designation when he starts in office?
My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, I have no doubt will engage at the earliest opportunity with the incoming administration in the White House. I've already made it clear that we have already requested the US put in place comprehensive exemptions to facilitate humanitarian support. We will continue to work both bilaterally with the US and internationally through the UN and others to protect the people suffering in Yemen, to prevent famine where we can, and work with all parties involved to bring this extended conflict to a conclusion.
Let's head to Wales with Shadow Minister Wayne David. Wayne David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As we have heard, from today, President Trump and Mike Pompeo have designated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. This will make peace in Yemen more difficult to achieve and could now lead to the starvation of over 1 million people. And yet our government has said and done little, and they even abstained in the UN Security Council. Why has the government failed to condemn this obviously dangerous step? And will the government now join with us and call on Joe Biden to reverse this decision as quickly as possible?
Mr. Speaker, the idea that the United Kingdom has not been active on this issue is self-evidently nonsense. This is an issue that I and my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, have discussed with each other, with the international community, through the United Nations. We have provided significant amounts of humanitarian support to Yemen itself. We have lobbied to ensure that humanitarian access remains. This is a genuine global tragedy, and I am incredibly proud of the work that the government of the United Kingdom has done, both on its own and in conjunction with the international community, to bring this terrible, terrible conflict to a conclusion.
To Minister Duddridge.
The British government remains concerned at the continued conflict in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, and I urge both sides to end fighting, protect civilians and allow unfettered humanitarian access. The Foreign Secretary has stressed these points directly to Prime Minister Abiy and with the Deputy Prime Minister Tim Kelly when he visited the UK recently.
I sent to North Norfolk with Duncan Baker. Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mrs. Peter Benson, a constituent of mine, has supported an orphanage in Tigray for years. Like many, we are extremely worried by the reported appalling humanitarian crisis the conflicts have brought to the region. Can my right honourable friend tell me that every effort is being made by the British government to calm those hostilities and further de-escalate civil war in that region of Ethiopia?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his activity on this issue and can reassure him that we are making such efforts. I certainly underlined the need to end fighting and prioritise the protection of civilians when I spoke to the Ethiopian Finance Minister last month, and I've also raised the conflict with regional leaders in the past few weeks, and the Foreign Secretary and I will continue to raise these points, and I thank him for the contribution he's making to the debate.
Number 25, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the UK has invested £3.7 billion in tackling malnutrition since the Nutrition for Growth Summit in 2013. And the UK has reached 55.1 million children, women and adolescent girls through our nutrition programmes from 2015 to 2020. And I was really pleased when the Foreign Secretary appointed the UK's first Special Envoy for Famine Prevention and Humanitarian Affairs last year, announcing alongside that £119 million to address food insecurity and £30 million partnership with UNICEF to address acute malnutrition.
David Munda.
It was excellent, Mr. Speaker, to see UK leadership on global nutrition acknowledged by world leaders at the Canada Nutrition for Growth event in December. That event launched 2021 as a year of action for nutrition, which could hardly be more timely given that COVID-19 is causing rates of malnutrition worldwide to rise for the first time in decades. So nutrition must be central to the Honourable Lady's new department's objectives for aid spending. For example, it's impossible to meaningfully progress girls' education while rates of malnutrition among girls are on the rise. Can I therefore ask the Minister if the Government will urgently review their commitment to tackle malnutrition as part of the participation in the Year of Action?
Thank you. I know this is something that the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, has taken a keen interest in, and he's been trying to get a question at FCDRs for some time, Mr. Speaker. But it is evident that good nutrition underpins education and health outcomes and adult learning in developing countries. And this was the rationale for the UK playing a lead role on nutrition over the past decade. Prevention and treatment of malnutrition remain key for achieving the government's commitment to ending the preventable deaths of mothers, mothers, newborns and children. The Department is, of course, beginning a rigorous internal prioritisation process in response to the spending review announcement, and we will update on the implications of this for nutrition as soon as is feasible.
We have 26 withdrawn, so we go to 27 substantive questions to the Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 27 and 28 together. We are aware of reports that an Indian soldier has been charged after the deaths of 3 Kashmiri men. We welcome assurances from the Indian government that its army is committed to ethical conduct and that disciplinary action will be undertaken in accordance with Indian law where necessary. Where we have concerns about human rights in Kashmir, we will continue to raise them with the India and Pakistani governments.
Send up to Sarah Owen in Luton North. Sarah Owen.
Mr. Speaker, 3 young Kashmiris working as labourers were abducted and brutally murdered by an army counterinsurgency officer. Illegal weapons were strapped to their bodies and they were wrongly branded hardcore terrorists. I know the Minister shares my concern that horrific abuses in Kashmir aren't new or uncommon. But as our country continues to chart a new course internationally, can he tell us what the government is actually doing to protect human rights in Kashmir and why the Secretary of State sat next to him lacks the courage to speak out against injustices around the world?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady, I know, is very passionate about this area and speaks on behalf of many of her constituents who have an interest in Kashmir. I can assure her that the Foreign Secretary has spoken directly with his counterpart as recent as December on this issue. India and Pakistan, Mr. Speaker, are long-standing important friends of the UK. We encourage both to engage in dialogue and find lasting diplomatic solutions to maintain stability in the region. It is not for the UK to prescribe a solution or act as a mediator. It is for India and Pakistan to find a lasting political resolution on Kashmir.
I said to Wickham with Steve Baker. Steve Baker.
Kashmiri man showed me footage of his home in Kashmir on fire, purportedly after being shelled by India. I've provided to the government some evidence that cluster munitions were used by India against another village in Kashmir. These things really matter to my constituents. People in Wickham could easily, after the pandemic, be in their homes in Kashmir. Isn't it time to take seriously a UN report on the human rights situation on both sides of the line of control, to have a coordinated international effort to put UN human rights inspectors into both sides of the line of control, and to move forward with a new human rights framework for the UK, which can reassure diaspora communities like mine in Wickham that the UK is standing up for their human rights when they're in the countries from which their families and their ancestors hail.
Well, my honourable friend is 100% correct to raise this. Again, he's a constant champion for his constituents on this area. We do recognise that there are human rights concerns in both India-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Again, we encourage all states to ensure domestic laws are in line with international standards and to cooperate with UN human rights officials and all mechanisms of the Human Rights Council. We have requested permission for officials from the British High Commission in New Delhi to visit India-administered Kashmir as soon as the situation permits.
We now come to topical questions. Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Development Affairs. I call Secretary Dominic Raab to make a statement on his responsibilities. I will then call Rebecca Long-Bailey to ask her supplementary virtually. Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the last oral questions, I visited India, where I had positive conversations with Prime Minister Modi, Foreign Minister Jaishankar and others about strengthening our trade, our security cooperation and indeed human rights, as questions have asked in this session. Last week, I introduced measures to make sure no British organisations, government or private, profit from or contribute to human rights violations in Xinjiang. And of course, last month, Mr. Speaker, we delivered the historic EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, excellent deal for all parts of the United Kingdom.
Let's head up to Salford with Rebecca Long-Bailey. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly welcomed the comments of the Minister earlier regarding the situation in Yemen. However, will the government now back up its words with action and suspend all arms sales and military support to the Saudi-led coalition for use in Yemen, especially within the context of President-elect Biden's commitment to end the war in Yemen?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, look, we absolutely are pushing every lever to try and precipitate peace in relation to Yemen. Our arms exports to Saudi, which you referred to, are subject to a world-leading and very rigorous process. So we're making sure that we do everything that is required on that front. On the 3rd of December, I announced an extra £40 million of UK aid to help 1.5 million households access food and medicines. And of course, we're pushing through every possible avenue the efforts of the UN Special Envoy, Martin Griffiths.
I said to North Norfolk with Duncan Baker. Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New variants of coronavirus are emerging from South Africa to Brazil. The government has acted quickly by banning flights from these regions, but how can we try and preempt these risks? Countries like Australia shut their borders in March last year to all countries and only permitted their citizens and permanent residents entry with strict quarantines. What assessment has my right friend made of following a similar approach in the future should the public health risks be severe?
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman and just say, first of all, he's right, we've taken decisive action in relation to South Africa and South America. We've also, as a precautionary measure, suspended the travel corridors and made sure we have a system where you have a pre-departure negative test. We have the passenger locator form backed up by increasing enforcement, both by PHE and the Border Force. And of course, we've reintroduced the quarantine on arrival with the extra checks to make sure people are resting in the home.
Shadow Secretary of State Lisa Nandy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary had strong words about the arrest of Alexei Navalny, but he knows that those words won't be taken seriously by Moscow until the UK takes action to disrupt the networks of dirty money on which this regime depends. How many of the Russia report recommendations have now been implemented?
Can I thank the honourable lady and say that we, like her, are absolutely appalled by Alexei Navalny's politically motivated detention. It is a Kafkaesque situation, frankly, Mr. Speaker, when instead of dealing with and supporting the victim of this Novichok poisoning, he has been arrested. She will know that we've taken action, including imposing sanctions on 6 individuals and the State Scientific and Research Institute for Organic Chemistry and Technology, and we're leading efforts in the OPCW, which is the real action that will send a message to Russia.
He seems to be struggling with the answer to this, so I can tell him that the answer is none. Of 21 recommendations made 15 months ago, the government has implemented not a single one. No action on foreign agents, no action on golden visas, and the London laundromat is still very much open for business. Well, can he not see the problem that for as long as the City of London acts as a haven for dark money, he can tweet all he likes, but those words will be met with nothing but derision in Moscow? So let me ask him an easy one that he should be able to answer. We know that the laws in this country on espionage and foreign interference on British soil are not fit for purpose. So will he commit to this House today that he will bring forward legislation to fix this great big gaping hole in our defences, not in the coming months, not at a date to be determined, but before this House rises for recess next month?
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. Well, she raises the report that preceded the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. What I'm explaining her is what we're doing in response to that, which I thought was what she cared about. Not only have we introduced sanctions on the individuals and the organisation I referred to, we led the joint statement in December, supported by 58 countries in the OPCW, calling for Russia to be held to account for what it does. If she really wanted to do something about the issue at hand, she would support and commend those efforts.
To Hollow with Robert Halfon. Robert Halfon.
Yeah.
Switch your mic on, Robert.
COVID is bankrupting Iraq and the Kurdistan region. A stalled budget deal between Erbil and Baghdad is bleeding the Kurds dry, and public servants were not paid for half of last year. A Barnett-style revenue sharing formula and progress to resolve the status of the disputed territories are vital as ISIL is regrouping in the no man's land between Kurdistan and Iraq. Could the UK urge the United Nations to take a more active role in negotiations between Erbil and Baghdad to help break the logjam so they can stabilise their relations and quickly?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and we recognise the importance of securing a budget deal between Erbil and Baghdad. The UK continues to encourage both sides to work towards resolving their issues to get a sustainable budget solution, but also to solve internal boundary disputes. And I do know the Minister for the Middle East and North Africa discussed this both with the governments of Iraq and the Kurdistan region of Iraq during his visit in November and December, and we regularly raise it in the United Nations and will continue to do so.
To Scotland with Jamie Stone. Jamie Stone.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Returning to the subject of Alexei Navalny, I wonder if I could ask what discussions the Foreign Secretary has had with the Home Office about granting refuge to the supporters of Alexei Navalny and indeed any other human rights defenders in Russia should they want it or need it.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman? I've had detailed discussions with the Home Secretary about the response to this and other examples of hostile state action. Of course, we have one of the most open and generous asylum systems in the world, and we continually focus at the support we provide for civil society groups, including media organisations, both in Russia and in Belarus.
Let's head to Gravesham with Adam Holloway. Adam Holloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I ask my right honourable friend, how many British Islamic State prisoners, men, women and children, are being held in northern Syria, and if there are any plans for them to come back to the UK? And if there aren't, what assistance are we providing the Kurds to secure them and indeed the other prisoners? Because I understand many of these are escaping.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say the member for Gravesham dresses better at home than he does in the House of Commons. But in relation to the substantive nature of his question, travel advice has always been against all travel to Syria. There is no consular support. We don't have diplomatic presence, and for these reasons, sadly, we don't have a firm number. However, I would invite him to discuss privately the security and very difficult situation of some of these cases, as he very well knows, with the Minister for the Middle East, and try to carve through a better solution to these problems that he quite rightly and so eloquently visually addresses.
Let's head up to Lewisham with Ellie Reeves. Ellie Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The official end of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's 5-year detention is less than 50 days away. But despite this, she continues to live under the threat of a further prison sentence. In 2017, when the current Prime Minister was Foreign Secretary, he promised to leave no stone unturned to bring Nazanin home. Can the current Foreign Secretary also make this commitment? And unlike his predecessor, will he actually make good on this promise?
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady and first of all say that we are leaving no stone unturned to secure the release of Nazanin, but also all of the other dual nationals arbitrarily detained. I've spoken to Nazanin. She's, of course, subject to furlough at the moment. I've spoken to her a number of times over recent months. We're doing everything we can. And, of course, the fact that she's on furlough and not in Yemen prison is, I think, signs that we have made some progress, although not enough, in securing her release and return back to her loved ones at home.
Let's head up to Arrow with Bob Blackman. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the government's strong condemnation of anti-Israel bias at the UN Human Rights Council recently. But the robust stance that we've taken there actually conflicts with our voting at the United Nations General Assembly, where we've supported dozens of resolutions hostile to Israel, even one erasing the Jewish connection to Jerusalem. So will my right honourable friend commit to ensure that going forward, our actions will better reflect our words?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable friend. I know he is always a great champion for all of the different community groups in his constituency. He's right to say to talk about the importance of balance in those UN resolutions. In fact, our record has not changed in recent years. It's been consistent. We support Palestinian right to self-determination, consistent with the two-state solution. We support the work of UNRWA. We have called out illegal Israeli settlement. And on the one in relation to Jerusalem, just point out it's not quite correct what he says, because it explicitly notes the importance of the holy sites to the three monotheistic religions. We've also voted against one resolution, abstained on three, precisely because we didn't feel they were balanced.
Let's head up to Scotland with Alison Thewlis. Alison Thewlis.
That the US designation of the Houthis as a terrorist organisation has already meant that banks are refusing to facilitate vital commercial wheat and rice imports to Yemen. So what specific conversations has the UK government had with the banks on this matter?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady. We can talk to the banks, but of course they will follow the designation that is made by the US. Like, as my honourable friend, the Minister earlier said, we are concerned that those sanctions and that designation will not allow for the humanitarian aid that we, as she and others across the House, feel is absolutely essential to alleviate the blight of the conflict in Yemen. But also, I think it's right to say, the effort's got to be on bringing that conflict to resolution, which can only happen through Martin Griffiths and the UN-sponsored plan.
We now go up to Blythe Valley with Ian Levy. Ian Levy. Press your mic. Unmute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently received letters from a Year 4 class at Seaton Delaval First School in my constituency, who are very concerned about climate change and the various challenges facing our planet. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that progress can be made on this matter through international cooperation on tackling climate change, and we must embrace the views of our youngsters of today to look after the future of tomorrow? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't agree more, and I can from the dispatch box confirm that I'm more than happy to visit Blythe Valley to talk to his constituents of all ages. Constituents, particularly young constituents, are a powerful catalyst for change. As COP26 President, we will work with all international partners, including young people across the globe, and I will be particularly interested to talk to them about the Italian government's thing that they are doing pre-COP26, having a youth event in Milan, bringing together 400 youth delegates with a final declaration which will be submitted to COP26. I look forward to returning to my office soon with the invite at my desk.
Let's head to socials with Emma Lewell-Belt. Emma Lewell-Belt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary will know that tripartite talks are taking place today between Bangladesh, China and Myanmar regarding Rohingya repatriation. The process has been slow as the Rohingya refugees, after fleeing horrific genocidal violence, remain understandably distrustful of the Myanmar government. Can he advise what representations he has made to his counterparts involved in today's talks and what involvement the UK currently has in the Rohingya crisis?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her interest and her passion? And, it is a heartbreaking story, what's happened to the Rohingya. The United Kingdom has not only supported the diplomatic efforts, we've not only a major aid provider to deal with the refugee crisis, we also, as you may be aware, through our Magnitsky sanctions, have imposed travel bans and asset freezes on those responsible for the persecution of the Rohingya.
So I'll just break with Edward Timpson. Edward Timpson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I welcome the recent appointment of my honourable friend, the member for Mason and the Weald, as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy on Girls' Education. And in doing so, can I ask my right honourable friend to reassure the House that this vital work to tackle poverty and create opportunity across the world will continue to be a key priority for this government and will be raised with the incoming Biden administration at the earliest opportunity so that further progress can be made to ensure that every girl gets a decent education?
My honourable friend's absolutely right, and I join him in congratulating the honourable friend for Meaden and Weald. She'll do a fantastic job in this crucial area. In relation to the UK's approach to girls' education, we have a global target to get 40 million more girls into education so they can have at least 12 years quality education. We want to get 12 million young girls literate by the age of 20. We will be discussing that with the new administration. I've already discussed it with leading members of Congress, including Speaker Pelosi.
Mr. Speaker, more than 100 honourable members of this House signed a cross-party letter to the Prime Minister about our anxieties for the peacefully protesting farmers in India, and we await eagerly his response. But does the Secretary of State agree that it's extremely concerning to hear alarming reports of harassment and intimidation by the authorities there, who have started issuing notices to peaceful protesters, union leaders and human rights activists?
I do understand the honourable gentleman's concerns. I've discussed the protests with Foreign Minister Jaishankar when I visited India in December. Of course, this is a major government-led reform, reducing subsidies as part of the liberalisation process, but he makes some important points about freedom of protest and the sensitivity. Of course, India's politics is very much our politics, but we do also need to respect their own democratic process.
I send it to Newcastle in line with Aaron Bell. Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's obviously crucial for both scientific understanding and global security that we understand the origins of the COVID-19 outbreak. So could I ask my right honourable friend what assessment he's made of the US State Department's fact sheet published on the 15th of January, detailing that the US government has reason to believe that several researchers inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology became sick in autumn 2019 before the first identified case of the outbreak, with symptoms consistent with both COVID-19 and also common seasonal illnesses.
Can I thank my honourable friend? And of course, we're aware of the fact sheet, and I've had discussions with Secretary of State Pompeo about this, and we'll continue to do so, I'm sure, with the new administration. Our focus has been on the WHO review and making sure it can get access to the area to conduct the review and have the proper access to come up with the answers people want. The WHO officers and the review team were given access last Thursday. That is a first step. We need to make sure that they can proceed through that inquiry to give the proper, the clear, the fact-based answers to the questions he rightly poses.
Senator Hartlepool with Michael. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister update the House on the situation with the Uyghur people in the Xinjiang province of China?
I thank the honourable gentleman. I gave an update to the House recently, just a few days ago, in relation to the situation. We regard the reports both of forced labour, conditions of detention, the forced sterilisation of women as grave violations of human rights, which is why we've introduced new measures to prevent any British businesses feeding into the supply chains, or indeed any businesses in China profiting in the UK from this gruesome trade.
Final question, Ben Everett.
Mr. Speaker, charities are working harder than ever, both at home and abroad, including, of course, the wonderful World Vision based in Milton Keynes. Can my right honourable friend update the House on what support is being given by the UK government to support charities providing aid to the most vulnerable people in some of the most poorest countries around the world? And will my right honourable friend undertake to meet World Vision to discuss their work?
Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for this question and for highlighting the work that so many civil society organisations do. They are key partners for the FCDO in delivering the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. They work as critical delivery partners with other donors and with international organisations such as the UN, who are active in responding to the crisis. We've allocated almost £67 million directly to international charities and UK-based charities to play their critical role to support vulnerable communities with the humanitarian impact of this virus. And I would like to thank World Vision for the work that they do, and if they contact me, I'd happily arrange a meeting with them. Thank you.
I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements for the next business to be made. Order. Order. I will first call Minister Caroline Dynage to answer the urgent question from Pete Wishart. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This government recognises the importance of the UK's world-leading cultural and creative industries. We recently demonstrated this commitment by providing an unprecedented £1.57 billion package of support to help them through the COVID-19 pandemic. It's entirely consistent, therefore, that we pushed for ambitious arrangements for performers and artists to be able to work across Europe during the negotiations with the EU. Our proposals, which were informed by our extensive consultation and engagement with UK's cultural and creative industries, would have allowed UK musicians and other cultural touring professionals to travel and perform in the UK and the EU more easily without the need for work permits, but regrettably, these very mutually beneficial proposals were rejected by the EU. As a result, UK cultural professionals seeking to tour within the EU will be required to check domestic immigration and visitor rules for each member state in which they intend to tour. Although some member states allow touring without a permit, others will require a pre-approved visa and/or a work permit. It's absolutely vital that we now support our touring sectors to understand the new rules associated with working and travelling in the EU, and we're delivering an extensive programme of engagement with the sector to help them understand any new requirements. This includes working with the Arts Council England and various other sector bodies to help distill and clarify the new rules. As my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has already made very clear, we will also look at whether we can work with our partners in EU member states to find ways to make life easier for those working in the creative industries in our respective countries. And in the meantime, we will continue close dialogue with the creative and cultural sectors to understand the ongoing impacts and ensure that they have the right support at the right time to continue to thrive.
I will call Pete Wishart, who is participating virtually, who's 2 minutes. Pete Wishart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is an immensely disappointing response from the Minister. Touring Europe means everything to our artists and musicians. The thrill of that first tour, crammed into the transit van with all your gear, 4 to a room in a cheap hotel in Paris, Rotterdam or Hamburg, using what's left of the fee for a post-gig beer. The dream that when you come back, it will be in a lavish tour bus staying in 5-star hotels. Gone, all gone. Musicians and artists mere collateral in this government's obsession in ending freedom of movement. Does the Minister acknowledge that visas and carnets will render these type of tours beyond financial reach to future generations of new musicians? Does she appreciate that it's not just the new musicians, it's the whole creative sector which will have increased costs and red tape? What does she say to the crews, the technicians, the set designers, the transport? We were promised by her predecessor that arrangements would not change. What has happened to that commitment? The EU said they were prepared to offer a 90-day deal. Why was that turned down? The government said they were holding out for a better deal, but we've ended up with nothing. How could that happen? Given the Minister's approach is totally contradicted by the EU, will the Minister provide complete transparency in all these negotiations? Mr. Speaker, our constituents really care about this. 263,000 have now signed a petition organised by our artists calling for this to get sorted. We don't want any more of the EU blaming. We've had quite enough of that in the past few years. We just want the government to fix this. The Secretary of State has said the door is still open. So will she walk through this and fix it out? Will she now restart talks with the EU immediately to get our artists the arrangements they need? Will she let the music tour freely once again?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Honourable Gentleman is right to point out that this is incredibly disappointing news for the music sector. It is not the deal that we wanted, but I'm afraid that in many other senses he has fallen for some very selective briefing. The EU did not offer a deal that would have worked for musicians. It's quite simple. The EU, in fact, made a very broad offer which would not have been compatible with the government's manifesto commitment to take back control of our borders. And I would remind him that the British people, the British public, voted for that at successive elections. To the extent that the EU proposals may have covered music, they also wouldn't have worked for touring artists at all. Their proposals covered ad hoc performances. They also wouldn't have covered support staff or technicians at all, which, as he will remember from his touring days, are completely essential. I mean, I'd love him to explain to me how tours will happen without support staff or technicians, because I'm not a music professional, but I can't see how that could be the case. The UK's proposals were actually based upon what the music industry said they wanted. We spoke to them long and hard about this. I'm fascinated to think that he knows better than bodies like the Musicians' Union. We fought very hard for what they wanted. The EU wouldn't play ball. But let's focus on the future. If the EU is willing to consider the UK's very sensible proposals, then the door is open. And yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to walk through it. I'll be the first one through that door. A mutually beneficial deal isn't what the SNP want, though, is it? I mean, they voted for a no-deal Brexit, so under their plans, it would have been even harder. And as the music industry themselves have said, what they need now is clarity, not recriminations. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what the British government are working to provide.
Let's head up to Solihull with the Chair of the Select Committee, Julian Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This issue is not just about musicians being able to travel and perform with ease. They also need somewhere to strut their stuff. Will the Minister commit to an overarching strategy to get live music thriving again, involving a restart of urgent negotiations for a pan-EU musicians visa, bearing in mind previous EU intransigence and listening to the music industry? But also, will the government commit to back COVID insurance for our festivals and live music sector to allow them to plan for the summer and beyond?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman's absolutely right. There's quite a lot we can do here. The sector, they need clarity and they need certainty about what the situation is. And because the situation with every member state is different, that's going to be tricky to provide. So what we need to do is make it as simple, as easy and as clear for them to tour and go about their business as we possibly can. And that is what we're setting about to do right now. He raises the issue of insurance. It's an excellent point. We understand that that is a barrier to very many live music events being able to take place later on in the year, and we're in discussions with our colleagues in the Treasury about that at the moment.
I'm going to call the Shadow Minister, Alison Mcgovern, who's participating virtually, who has 2 minutes. Alison Mcgovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to draw the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. As we've heard, Mr. Speaker, the government still blame the EU. So in order to get this issue straight, can the Minister make clear what exactly the UK proposed and when they proposed it, and if the UK offer was more than their standard visa policy? Second, on this, she said that the EU offer was a broad offer not consistent with taking back control of our borders. So will she go further and explain specifically when that offer was turned down? And finally, so that we all can be clear, will she place in the Library of the House of Commons all correspondence between the UK and the EU on this, and between UK government departments on this issue? But what does matter is what happens now, Mr. Speaker. And a third of the creative industry is self-employed. And this situation is a massive kick in the teeth for a group of workers already having the worst year in living memory. So what representations has the UK made to resolve this? And can she say what meetings are scheduled? Is the UK still going to rely on Mode 4 exemptions, even though doing so is without precedent? And can I ask her if she agrees that the resolution to this situation requires a supplementary agreement? I really think that she has to go further and to spell out exactly what the proposal is now from the UK to resolve this situation. Because, Mr. Speaker, creative people tour, they don't just power up an economy that's massively important to us. They represent us all on the global stage. So we have to get this resolved now.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to talk the Honourable Lady through the situation. So during the negotiations, the EU tabled text regarding short-stay visa-free travel. And embedded in this proposal was a declaration which would have covered a very small number of paid activities. With regard to artists, it covered ad hoc performances. Of course, this declaration was non-binding and didn't address anything like technical or support staff. And crucially, it didn't cover the whole issue of work permits, which EU member states are able to unilaterally put in place. Furthermore, of course, these proposals would have enshrined permanent visa-free short stays for all EU citizens, not just current but future EU citizens as well, in the agreement. And that is just simply not compatible with our manifesto commitment to take back control of our borders. And our proposals instead were based on the views of the music industry, as I've already said, would have been very mutually beneficial across the EU and Europe and the UK, and would have allowed musicians and support staff as well to travel and perform in the UK and the EU more easily without needing work permits. The EU did not propose and would not accept a tailored deal for musicians, for artists, for their support staff to tour across the EU and the UK. As I've said, the UK's door remains open should the EU change its mind. We recognise that the outcome will mean some additional requirements need to be met for the sector, and we are working with the sector as fast as we can to put in place the support and the information that they need. But Mr. Speaker, Labour voted for this deal in the knowledge of what it involved, including the end of free movement. What they're asking us to go back and renegotiate now is exactly what we negotiated at that time. So they literally can't have it both ways. They need consistency. And what the sector needs more than anything at the moment is certainty. And that is what we are working to provide them.
Let's head to Kent with Damien Green. Damien Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The international success of UK musicians has for decades been not just a big economic benefit for the country, but a huge and successful way of promoting our culture around the world. So it seemed extraordinary that any British government would turn down a deal that allowed our musicians to tour music if that deal was practical. So can the Minister assure me both that that's not what happened, and also what she's doing now to resume negotiations so we can get a realistic deal, which is essential for the future of our music industry?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman, my Right Honourable friend, is absolutely right. The government recognises the absolute vital importance of the UK's thriving cultural and creative industries, and that is why we pushed for ambitious arrangements for performers and artists to be able to work right across Europe after the end of freedom of movement. The EU didn't accept our proposals, so now we need to make sure that we are working to facilitate those arrangements as best we can. That means giving musicians and others access to information, access to guidance, access to what the individual criteria is for which EU member state, and then working with those individual member states to make sure that that process is as seamless, as fast, effective and simple as it can possibly be.
I'm now going to call SNP spokesperson John Nicholson, who's also participating virtually, who's got 1 minute. John Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Sir, COVID has been gruelling for the industry. The last thing it needs are the new Brexit visa barriers. We now know that the UK government, not the EU, but the UK government has insisted upon. There's no money to be made from streaming. Artists make their income by touring. New barriers, visas, and endless red tape mean EU performers won't come to our festivals, and our performers will face prohibitive new costs. It's wantonly cruel. Now, the Minister mentioned the Musicians' Union, so let me quote their head. He said, "The government fails to understand the issues facing touring musicians." He's an expert, and I know that the UK government doesn't like experts, but this is more Brexit zealotry causing misery. Will the Secretary of State listen and intervene and publish that correspondence as my colleague requested. Put it in the library. Let's read it.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course there is a close historical relationship between the UK and the EU, and that must endure, and that will endure, Mr. Speaker. Artists and musicians from the EU are welcome, they are encouraged to visit and perform in the UK, and vice versa, and the government will do everything we can to make that as seamless as possible.
Let's head to the southwest with Selene Saxby. Selene Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend for the work she is doing to support the arts and culture sectors through the pandemic? And can my honourable friend confirm how many music venues and other music organisations have benefited from the government's £1.57 billion Cultural Recovery Fund?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, actually, I'd like to start by thanking my honourable friend for the work that she does to champion the cultural institutions across her constituency. She's a great voice for the people of North Devon, sorry, but I'm sure she's very nice about the people of North Dorset as well. But thank you for her question. The 1.57 Cultural Recovery Fund, of which we've already delivered more than £1 billion in support to various arts, heritage and performance organisations, to date has awarded 680 awards to music, totalling over £111 million, Mr. Speaker.
Let's head to Wales with Kevin Brennan. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did ask the Prime Minister last week, and he promised a meeting with myself and the Conservative Chair of the Select Committee on this, and I was still to hear from Number 10. I don't know if the Minister can shed any light on that, but I do want her to realise that a lot of touring musicians are not there with a lot of tech support. They are actually individuals starting out, or perhaps who are established, but not with that kind of level of support. And effectively, it represents the R&D of an important industry. They may just be traveling with a single instrument on a plane with some fans in Europe. But I think the most important thing she could do today is, others have asked this, is to publish in full the details of the discussions between the EU and the UK on this, so that we can all see what the ambitious proposals were and why she finds them so objectionable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I know the honourable gentleman is a great champion for the music industry and not a bad musical performer himself. But you know, he's absolutely right. We do understand that for those starting out in the music industry, the ability to be able to tour is something that's so vital to their career and their future prosperity. Which is why the EU proposals, which didn't support touring activity, they just supported ad hoc artist activity, would not have done it for so many of them, which is why we pushed for something so much better. We are very disappointed that the EU didn't see it our way, but you know, we will try and do everything we can to support them moving forward. And you know, and I'll speak to my colleagues in Bays and the Home Office about publishing the information that he's requested.
Hertfordshire with Gagan Mahindra. Gagan Mahindra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister will be aware, South West Hertfordshire is home to many successful and established musicians. Can my honourable friend confirm, though, that the UK's proposals in negotiations were based on the views of the UK music industry and would have allowed musicians to travel and perform in the UK and Europe more easily without the need for work permits?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this. As I've said already, we work very collaboratively with a whole range of stakeholders in this, including UK Music and the Musicians' Union, to put forward proposals that were really based upon the views of the music industry as to what it was that they needed. It would have been mutually beneficial to the UK and the EU, and it would have allowed musicians and, crucially, their support staff or their technicians to travel and perform more easily without the need for work permits.
To Scotland with Jamie Stone. Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I must be honest and say I do welcome the fact, and I quote, that the door is still open to UK performers performing permit-free in the EU. Surely, Mr. Speaker, the danger is that concert promoters in the EU will simply take the easy option and go for a Dane or a German performer rather than the sheer hassle of the British performers. And also there are problems with the movement of musical instruments, which we know about. I have written to DCMS just now saying, could we please have a meeting between ministers, myself, and musicians who are knowledgeable about this issue. At the end of the day, we've got to try and sort it out. So I would be extremely grateful if the Minister would agree to such a meeting.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, look, yeah, absolutely. I'm very happy to meet with anybody on this because it's really important that we continue regular engagement with the sector. We need to make sure that we've got a very deep understanding of their needs and their questions in light of these changes. We know that it will pose a whole number of queries. I mean, most recently we held an EU exit explainer seminar with over 200 sector representative bodies in attendance. The Secretary of State's got a roundtable on Wednesday, tomorrow, with representatives across the cultural and creative industries, and we will keep doing those sorts of sessions all the time people need and require them.
Sarah Brisley.
Speaker, I've had quite a number of constituents contact me from Highburn and Hasland and highlighting their concerns on this. So can the Minister please reassure my constituents by outlining what the Department is doing to address this?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I know that my honourable friend is such a great champion for her local area and will be taking the concerns of her constituents incredibly seriously, as indeed do we. We understand that we need to work with all the sort of music sector trade bodies to make sure that we give people access to the information they need as to what are the situations in all the individual nation states, because they're all different, which is one of the most confusing things about this, and to make sure that we are working with those individual nations as closely as we can to ensure that any barriers that are in place are made as simple and easy to navigate as possible.
Let's head to Putney with Fleur Anderson. Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Putney, creative artists and support staff have already been damaged by the uncertainty around Brexit and on top of COVID effects, and so not being able to tour. This failure of negotiations for the creative industry's 90-day visa is letting down industry and the arts. Is the Minister really just going to sit back with her door open, or re-enter negotiations and be prepared for some give and take with individual countries to get that tailored deal that the creative industries really need?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what I've said during the course of today that could ever give the honourable lady the viewpoint that I am just prepared to sit back and do nothing about this, or that I'm happy with the way things have panned out. I did vote for the trade agreement, but then I presume so did she. We are not sitting there doing nothing. We are talking, we are and we will continue to talk to other EU member states. They could, of course, unilaterally make things easier, Mr. Speaker, for those travelling artists and musicians, but of course any changes they make would be very, very likely to cover all visitors, not just those from the UK. But the key thing we can do is continue to talk to the sector and make sure that we're putting in place any support and information and guidance that they need.
Let's head up to Cumbria with Simon Fell. Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by a number of constituents on this issue, notably the Furness Tradition Group. Could my honourable friend confirm that despite some of the reporting in recent days, touring in the EU is still possible for UK artists and musicians, and that the government's working towards a more formal arrangement with the EU?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, quite simply, of course, touring is still encouraged. Artists and musicians from the EU are very welcome and encouraged to visit and perform in the UK, and absolutely vice versa. I'm sure different individual member states have different restrictions when it comes to visas and work permits. Some have very limited, some are a little bit more complicated, but this is very much a quid pro quo. It works for the EU as much as it does for our musicians here in the UK. And I'm sure that there are very, very many countries that want to come to an arrangement that will allow their musicians to move and to travel and to work and to tour and to take their beautiful music around Europe.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that this is a double whammy
for anyone that cares about levelling up in the creative industries in West Yorkshire and beyond. Recent figures have showed the creative industries in West Yorkshire and the Humber have grown by 10.9%. So it's really important we keep this industry flourishing for jobs and opportunities. So can the Minister tell us what the government have put in place to compensate for these inevitable loss of opportunities? And also, can she make available what impact assessment has been done to the changes that this will make on the ability of businesses to continue to flourish after COVID?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we know it's been just such a horrible year for particularly the sectors that I represent, the cultural, the creative industries, those in West Yorkshire and around the whole UK. COVID has been a bitter blow, and of course, we didn't get the agreement from the EU that we wanted on touring musicians. But we do want to do everything we can to support that. It's about providing clear, easy to access information, speaking to our colleagues in EU member states, and also we'll talk to our colleagues in the Treasury to see what financial support can be put in place at a future fiscal event.
14th withdrawn, so we're going up to Scotland with Tommy Shepherd. Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Edinburgh Fringe is the largest arts festival in the world. I hope the Minister will be aware that this event and others like it have a vital role to play in developing new work and providing a springboard for artists to then subsequently tour that work. Does she therefore not understand that by refusing to maintain a visa exemption for artists, she is fatally undermining festivals in Scotland and the United Kingdom?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I'm a massive fan of the Edinburgh Fringe. In fact, all of the Edinburgh festivals. Last summer was the first in any since I can remember that I wasn't able to go to Edinburgh and see them firsthand for myself, and it was a great something that I missed out greatly. And I met very recently, just before Christmas, with representatives from across the Edinburgh festivals to talk about all the issues that they're facing, particularly with regard to coronavirus, but others as well. And but you know, I should correct him that it wasn't for want of trying that we don't get this free movement of our musicians to be able to perform and to tour across the EU, or indeed vice versa. We fought very hard for it, and of course, you know, our own arrangements with regard to visas and work permits mean that musicians from and other performers from outside of the UK are very welcome to our shores.
Let's head to Wales with Stephen Crabb. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. British bands and professional musicians represent a hugely successful cultural export for the UK, and I know the Minister recognises that, and I know that she understands the importance of international touring in that success. But can I ask my honourable friend today what more she can do on a bilateral basis with her counterparts in EU member states to find specific solution to the problems that we're discussing today and ensure that touring remains as easy as possible for our world-leading musicians?
Thank my right honourable friend for that question. Of course, I'd love to, as I've said, the door is open. I'd love to be able to, change this across the board straight away, but that isn't going to be possible in the immediate or foreseeable future. So it is all about having those bilateral conversations with colleagues across EU member states. And at this stage, it wouldn't be about a waiver, but it would be about facilitation and what we can do to make the situation as easy and straightforward as possible. And of course, those are the conversations that we'll be having.
Let's head to Northern Ireland with Ian Paisley. Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Van Morrison penned the protest song "We Are Born to Be Free." However, it appears that musicians like him and others are now completely caught up in a red tape trap and are not free at all. I wonder if the Minister could clarify the situation with regards to carnets for musicians and instruments travelling from GB to Northern Ireland and from Northern Ireland back to GB. Can she confirm that they are definitely not required within the UK? However, once a person gets to Northern Ireland, will they be required to travel south, or will the common arrangements that we have with the Republic of Ireland still be in place? And once south, can a person then onward travel without a carnet to the rest of Europe? Could we get clarity on those issues?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Van Morrison also penned Brown Eyed Girl, which is my own personal anthem. But I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. If you're an artist or organisation based in Northern Ireland, you'll not be required to obtain ATA carnets or musical instrument certificates when touring in the EU, because the Northern Ireland Protocol means that Northern Ireland is part of the same regulatory environment for goods as the European Union. But Northern Ireland citizens who don't hold Irish citizenship as well will be subject to the same changes as other British citizens on mobility and business travel when going to EU member states, but of course not to the Republic of Ireland.
Said to Loughborough with Jane Hunt. Jane Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, a number of my constituents in the entertainment, arts and creative industries have contacted me setting out the impacts the new immigration restrictions will have on their livelihoods. It is clear that the UK government strive to gain a mutually beneficial agreement with the EU. Can the Minister therefore set out what steps the government is taking to continue to urge the EU to return to the negotiating table and reopen discussions to reach a more preferable agreement for all parties? And can I take this opportunity on behalf of my constituents to ask the EU to reconsider their position?
Thank you very much to my honourable friend for that question. Of course, there isn't the opportunity the negotiating team did negotiate an opportunity to come back and review this in the years ahead. So there, the light at the end of the tunnel is not entirely switched off, but there is quite a lot that we can do in between European nation states to try and make things a lot more easy and straightforward. But she's absolutely right to highlight that this is something that impacts European EU artists as much as it does those from the UK, and we want to make their lives as easy and straightforward as possible.
Let's head up to Greater Manchester with Barbara Keeley. Barbara Keeley.